Thank you, David. Our speaker today is Margaret Conroy, Executive Director of Daniel Boone Regional Library. She has served in this position since January 2018. Prior to this, Margaret was the Assistant Director at St. Charles City County Library District. Previously, she served as the Missouri State Librarian for 7 years, from 2006 to 2013. And before that, Margaret served as Director of the Regional Library Districts based in Moberly and Jefferson City. Margaret earned her master's degree in Library and Information Science from Dominican University in River Forest, Illinois, and a Master's of Public Administration from the University of Missouri-Columbia. She has served in various roles with the Missouri Library Association and is currently on the board, serving as the Missouri delegate to the American Library Association Council, as well as on the Legislative Committee. Welcome, Margaret.
Thank you. Gosh, that makes me feel old and like I've really been around the block hearing that bio. So I very much appreciate the opportunity to talk to you all today. I see a few friendly faces on the screen. I know everybody's probably friendly to the message that I'm going to share today. I will keep an eye on the chat. I love questions. And as I mentioned to someone, that I would like this to be a dialogue, but I wanted to start out just giving a little bit of background about kind of how we got here and why the Secretary has the ability to impose rules on public library funding in the state of Missouri. I know many of you probably have a pretty thorough understanding about how government works, but we have been getting some questions from our patrons is like, why is the Secretary even able to do this? Well, the Secretary of State, among the divisions of his department, is sort of the titular head of the state library. There is a Missouri state librarian that runs the actual work, but that division is a part of the Secretary of State's office, and he does have the ability to put rules on the state aid that is that most of the public libraries in the state have access to. But typically, the rules have been very broad, including a public library has to have a certain level of local funding to qualify for state aid. It's kind of a matching grant. Most public libraries in the state meet that threshold. I am going to try to temper my remarks about the Secretary's motivations here, but I will start by saying this seems to be very clearly a political move on his part. We are aware that he has a conservative political consultant group working with him to frame his campaign for the governorship. And the timing of dropping this rule after Eric Schmidt got elected and is sort of moving away from the limelight is now giving this current secretary some elbow room to grab some media attention. Whether or not he really, how firmly he believes in what he's doing, I think is an open question. I will say I have had a phone conversation with him, and he is presenting his reasoning for putting this rule in place because he feels like libraries need guidance on developing policy. We're pretty much decades ahead of him there. So what does this actually mean for libraries? The state aid that we receive, our library district in this past year received about $251,000 in state aid. This comes to libraries in 2 appropriations, but it also includes funding that supports, provides us with discounted internet access, pays for some databases that we offer to our patrons, and also helps facilitate federal funding that comes to the state of Missouri for libraries. The rule as written is a little bit unclear as to which of these funds, is it just a segment of them or all of them will be affected. So what he is proposing is a restriction on access to state aid. It is a little different, but I think related to something we saw happen at the end of the last legislative session. At the end of session, someone amended Senate Bill 775 to create a criminal statute criminalizing some activity of school librarians in providing materials of a sexual nature for students. And so we do feel like that and when I say we, I'm talking about the entire library community in this state, and frankly also the nation, because we're not alone facing these issues, that there is a concerted effort to control access to materials. Our concerns from the library community are somewhat twofold. One set of concerns is the vagueness of the rules, and another is how we feel like it strikes at the heart of intellectual freedom and what we do as public libraries. So if you will allow me, I'm going to share my screen and kind of just talk sort of point to point through these rules. All right, can you guys all see that? I'm assuming you've all read them. All right, so to clarify, minors is defined in statute as persons under the age of 18. And so that is a really important definition here when we're talking about this, because it doesn't just apply to little children or 10-year-olds, it applies to 17-year-olds equally. So we do feel that this proposed rule is a solution in search of a problem. This first section, A, talks about putting policies in place. I would say, with the exception of maybe some very small city libraries in our state, all libraries, Daniel Boone Regional Library, of course included, have collection development policies that outline how we procure materials for the public and manage those materials. All of our policies are, and have been since I've been here anyway, posted on our website. So it's up front and center. The problem with this first piece here talks about the maturity level of any minor. Anyone who's had or worked with children know that there are no two children alike. And so it would be impossible for library staff to determine the maturity level of a minor. And I'm just going to go through and talk about the vagary pieces first. On section B, the definition of prurient, hard word to say, does not exist as far as I can tell in statute. And so that is also another vague term. I had a colleague tell me that anyone who knows kids, that any 12-year-old boy is going to find pretty much anything, period. You can't, another person can't determine what is prurient for someone else. Again, on, oh, and I should say on section B, the way this is worded, it applies to adult materials as well. It says materials in any form. So it's talking about Harlequin romances. It's talking about books with sexual content directed at adults and shelved in the adult section of the library. It's not just addressing this for children. Again, on section C, we have a policy. And in fact, our library has a number of ways that we direct parents to taking responsibility for their child's use of the library. Any library card issued to a person under 18 has to have the signature of a parent or legal guardian. And so from our perspective, the possession of that library card signed by a parent gives that child a right to access materials in our library. We do not screen what that child checks out at the desk because it's an implied permission from the card. We also have a rule that kids under 12 are not to be in the library by themselves or without the supervision of an adult or a guardian. And our rule does say, in this case, an adult can be a 16-year-old. So, for example, a family of kids can come into the library if the oldest sibling is 16, but it's still intended for that person to monitor the use of the library by their younger sibling. For the most part, this is twofold. This is to protect the physical safety of children, because librarians, we do our best, but we're not really responsible for that, but also to ensure that the family knows the kids are in the library. We filter our internet computers. We purchase materials and place them on shelves in age-appropriate areas already. All right, so section D that says no age-inappropriate materials in any form as defined in our policy shall be knowingly displayed in the library in areas designated by the library as containing materials predominantly for minors. We don't really know what this means. And for those of you, I'm sure you all come in and use our Columbia Public Library. our first floor is pretty much wide open. So sometimes we use our first floor display, our lobby display, to highlight materials for kids. We usually do seasonal or topical displays there, but we also have them throughout the library. And sometimes those displays have materials for all ages on a given topic. Typically, if we have a display in the children's area, it is furnished with materials that apply to children. But we feel that this one is open to criticism and examination by the public, as well as anything else. And also, again, it is just vague. Labeling events or presentation with age-appropriate designations affixed to the advertising. We already do that. We use very broad categories. If you go on our website and search our events, you will see that you can search by adult, teen, child. We don't know if that is enough for the secretary. We do it already. I think that is an easy thing for us to comply with. That again, though, is a guideline to help people decide what they want to do or see or view, not necessarily intended to restrict access to a given program. And then the last piece kind of has many of us sort of chuckling, or at least it does me, that we would have a publicly accessible materials challenge policy. Anyone who has a collection development policy in general has a way for the public to challenge it. This, however, does not say that challenges would be limited to taxpayers in the library district. So we are seeing in the library community at large, other libraries having folks from out of state coming in and taking issue with what is on their shelves. So we would like the secretary to, if he's going to move forward with this rule, at least explain who he thinks has the ability to challenge material in a local library. I feel like it should be the local constituency. And frankly, having worked in libraries for so long and dealt with these materials challenge policies before, some of them make no sense. Some of them are silly. Some are very impassioned and are asking us to do things like just simply remove material. Sometimes people say, I don't feel like this particular book belongs in, the elementary school area. It should be middle school or high school. And sometimes that's what we do. We make those changes. But forcing libraries to put these all on our website, I feel like is unnecessarily provocative. And it just places us in a defense position when we feel like we have all of this handled pretty well. So those are the practical reactions that we have to this. If we were to put a dollar amount to all of these rules, it would be far greater than the $500 in the aggregate that the secretary thinks is the public cost. I mean, if we take this at the strictest reading, then we have to not allow a 16-year-old to browse the adult fiction shelves, for example, or a 10-year-old to look at the high school level, the teen area, when that child might be a precocious reader. There's really just no way for the library to make this determination. So we fall back on the fact that we serve everyone and we expect parents to have responsibility for what their children read. We're seeing a lot of narrative in the more conservative responses that people are saying, well, the parents should decide. Well, absolutely, the parents should decide. We've never not said that. But for us, and you will see, I'm writing an editorial for the Missourian in response to something that was published yesterday. The biggest issue here is that everyone has a right to read. People have the right to decide for themselves, and parents have the right to decide for their children what they want their child to read. Parents and other people and the government, we believe, does not have the right to tell a child what they can or cannot read if it's not the parent of that particular child. I didn't articulate that very well, but I think you know what I'm talking about. Parents should be able to decide for their children. Parents really don't have a right to decide for someone else's child what they should read. And the dog whistle that's being used right now in conversations around this rule, claiming that libraries shouldn't have pornography, is just that. It's a dog whistle. Sexual content is uncomfortable, and books that have sexual content or depiction of sexual content for persons under the age of 18 can make adults uncomfortable, but so does a lot of material in our library. And we don't feel that we have the right as librarians to make that decision. Now, we don't provide pornography. And there is a definition of pornography in the law, and there is a definition of what a minor is in the law. There's no definition of prurient. There is a definition of child pornography. We don't supply that material. But do we have books about psychosocial and physical development of adolescents? Yes. Do we have books depicting families with same-sex parents? Yes. Do we have books about a teenager's personal journey for gender identity? Absolutely. I actually, and this is kind of sad, heard this characterized by a Missouri school librarian the other day as school librarians call those suicide prevention books. Sit with that for a minute. We have a role in helping our society, and we feel like that this rule is tying our hands in doing that. I've been working on this all day and writing my article, so I think I'm going to just pause there and take questions. I'm going to stop sharing my screen if that's all right with you guys. Oh, I see there are comments. And you know what, Mr. Robinson, I do think he at some level does believe in this, and I see raised hands too. I do think the secretary, I think he has this feeling, this moral position. But the fact that he has been over the state library for, I don't know, 2-3 years now, I can't even remember, I've lost track, and has a professional librarian that he has not discussed this with thoroughly or tried to understand the position of libraries is really pretty disheartening. Okay, I see a hand, David Mallory.
Yes, thank you, Margaret. I read through just recently that proposed rule that you just shared, and looking through it, it seems to me like I know where you're coming from, and I think as you do where he's coming from, like he's trying to purposely poke and become an adversary. But is there anything that just prevents us from saying, thank you very much, Mr. Secretary. Yes, we have complied with this. We have our policies and procedures in place, and they are shared. They're available to everyone. And leave it at that. Is there anything is there any reason to stand against that particular proposal? Or can we just say, yes, we're complying with it. Thank you. And leave it to him. If he wants to make a big deal over it a year from now or something, then we can address it more. But it seems to me like we want to, and I say we as Columbia or Boone County people, you're the person who obviously gets to do it, but it seems to me like we could just back off. Now, by doing that, we might be opening ourselves up to further control, and they say, oh, now we can tighten it up, and maybe it's a slippery slope we want to avoid. But I would think this proposal, there's nothing in it about restricting anything that I see, and we already divide our collection into, okay, here's this age group, this is juvenile, this is infants, or whatever the different groups are. So we already divide things. Anyway, that's kind of my question proposal.
And yes, that actually that's been discussed quite a bit. I belong to a number of public library groups and listservs and things like that. And we've talked a lot about that. In fact, the poor state librarian herself, who is caught in the middle between her professional ethics and her boss, said that. But we are taking into account everything that's been going on in this country and the really unfortunate behavior that is happening at some libraries, where people are storming board meetings, calling librarians groomers and pornographers, objecting to programs. It's ugly, and our concern is that this is a slippery slope. And going back to Senate Bill 775 that imposes criminal penalties on school librarians for material that you cannot necessarily determine is pornographic, is very concerning. And we know that there will be bills filed. I haven't checked today. There may be something already that expands that to public libraries. And so that it's the professional approach to intellectual freedom that many of us are coming down on the side of. Practically speaking, you're right. We could just say, oh, boop, it's fine, and deal with it if there's an objection later down the road. But I think we have librarians in the state who have quit their jobs, two very valued colleagues, because they just were sort of defeated by, in one case, their board members going off the rails, and in another case, somebody being stalked at home over nothing. So I hear you and I understand your point, and I agree with it to some extent. It's just, this is striking to our hearts. This is what we do, and this is one reason why our community loves our libraries, because anyone can walk in the door and get what they need from us. You know, with some limits, like we don't provide Playboy anymore. Apparently DBRL did a long time ago. But all right, I'm going to move to Sue. I don't know which of you has the question, the dilemmas.
This is Herb Tillema. I am an ardent supporter of libraries. I used to chair the University Library Committee for years. I was once upon a time employed by the National Archives. And I wish that this conversation could be couched in a different way. This is an opportunity, it seems to me, for us to put forward the critical function and role of public libraries and be positive from the start rather than just reactive. We've always had a problem with know-nothings, book burners, or as Jonathan Swift labeled them, yahoos. They're always there, one way or another. But I like, and I wonder if you do too, Thomas Jefferson's famous phrase about the library, the public library, which is emblazoned in stone, massive letters in the front of the library of the District of Columbia, the old library building, a university of the people.
I agree with you, and thank you for that perspective. The article that I'm just about to finalize for the Missourian is focused on that more or less. It does call out a couple comments from Steve Spellman, who wrote an editorial yesterday, but that is true. I mean, that's what we need to keep our eyes on, that we're here, we serve everybody. I feel public libraries are foundational in this nation to democracy. I put that in my article too, that, you know, we are really getting down in the weeds of in a place that I don't believe that we need to be, that we need to keep our eyes on the fact that we serve everybody. And yes, we have uncomfortable content that we always have and we always will. We do our best to manage that. And again, we put the responsibility back on the parent for what their child reads. We don't believe that that's the government's responsibility, even though technically public libraries are government. So, Carl and Mari?
Yeah, I'm the one that put the hand up. I'm kind of bringing this up in response to David's point earlier about kind of why rock the boat. And I just wanted to say that as we've seen with the draconian abortion laws that are going into effect, very often those who are subject to penalties under the law go to the extreme to avoid accruing any risk from their behavior. So I really think we would, if this goes into effect as it is, there will be libraries in the state that go way far in the other direction to try to comply for fear of these penalties. And that will be removing things from their shelves or trying to enforce age limits on who could look at what. And I think that's one of the dangers of this sort of thing. Vague rules or legislation that threaten people with either loss of funding or criminal prosecution lead to very risk-averse behavior. And I think that would be harmful for public libraries.
I agree. And actually, we have seen that has been happening in the school libraries in the state of Missouri. Now, keep in mind, too, there's a difference. A school library acts in loco, well, a school in loco parentis. Public libraries do not. And so school librarians, bless their hearts, they work really hard to find age-appropriate materials for their children. But we've seen some school districts go through their collections and remove everything on their shelf, including art materials that has any portrayal of a naked human body or any reference to sexual activity or development or anything. Now, some of them are reviewing them carefully and putting things back selectively, which is good. But some have just, wiped the shelves of anything that someone could object to. And that takes away classic materials in some cases, The Handmaid's Tale, material that have been on book lists forever, that many of us have read, The Bluest Eye, things like that. So yeah, I think that is one of the concerns, in that that's not what we want our society to be. Yeah, Alice, go ahead. You have a question.
Mute. Wasn't totally a question, was a comment. What's so sad about this is rural schools have so little resources, and their libraries probably have less resources. I taught in a rural school where they didn't have a copy of Anne Frank. Now, this was decades ago. Would this not affect a book like Anne Frank, since she talks about sexuality? I mean, this is just stunning and pretty frightening. So that was just the comment I wanted to make as a former teacher in a rural school.
I think that's a great comment. That speaks to equitable access to information for everyone in our state. We have a nice library system here in Daniel Boone. We serve everybody in Boone and Callaway County except for Centralia, and we have a nice relationship with that city library. And so I feel like we do a good job for all of our residents, but there are counties in this state. Montgomery County doesn't have a countywide library district, and they've got lots of small towns. They don't have access to core materials, let alone things that might stretch and inform their lived experience or their living experience, in other ways. So I do feel it's an equity access issue as well. Yep. So Alice, no, your hand is up. Carl or Mari, your hand is still up.
This is Carl this time. Thanks
Okay.
for coming, Margaret. I'm having some difficulty understanding the confusion or the confounding between some of the efforts to censor social media and get more people on board, Elon Musk in particular, removing some of these rules, and yet on a more local level, a parochial level, people coming in and insisting that there be more rules, and somehow there doesn't seem to be any compromise between these political persuasions, if you will, to either implement more censorship or remove the censorship. Any comments on that?
I would say, and I know you will all agree, that the internet and social media has sort of changed the game. Public libraries have been around in this country for well over 100 years, tax-supported public libraries, and even well before those, developed countries around the world had public libraries. And so we're pretty entrenched in our position about what the First Amendment says and how what our citizens have First Amendment rights, all the way up to Supreme Court decisions over the years about that. And so I don't feel like what the library is saying is much different from anything we've always said and done. I watch with confusion as well the actions of Mr. Musk and what is going on in the large social media companies and everyone's attempt to control who can have what app, all of it. It's frankly a little overwhelming to me. And so I feel like using my own experience and training and focusing on what my job is here for providing public library service and access to information to our county residents is where I have to put my energy right now. It has been an exhausting year, frankly, at Daniel Boone Regional Library. And but this is where we need to be, I think. I don't know if that helps Carl or not, but that's my perspective. I don't know whose hand went back up, the Dilemmas, and then Steve.
This is Sue, and I know before you worked in Jeff City. I worked in Jeff City, and Mari did also. It's a very different community, and the county probably even more so than Columbia and Boone County and even possibly Callaway. What is your perspective? How has that influenced your job? And more particularly, what was the difference of pressure that you may be getting or from the community between them?
You know, that's a great question. I worked even in more rural libraries based in Moberly, Randolph, and Monroe County. Well, we have to remember, we can look at the demographics on paper and look at the racial and economic makeup of our communities. And they are different. A more predominantly white community, a more predominantly educated or middle class community is going to have a different perspective than a more rural, less educated community. But at the end of the day, people all have the same needs and interests in information that they're looking for. And so as a librarian, while we have to be cognizant and we do make decisions on what we purchase, we don't buy everything that's published. We don't have, for example, here, even in Columbia, our library doesn't do drag queen story times. There's a bookstore downtown that does that. We don't feel the need. I chuckle sometimes when I see the costumes my own librarians are dressed up in. I'm like, it's the same. But when I should way back up and say to you all that I was raised by highly educated liberal parents who let us read whatever we wanted to read and understood that if we were too young to fully process the content, that it just didn't have an impression on us. I come from a different background than many people do because of my folks. But even that said, even communities that have different, I guess, mores or whatever, as a whole, still have people in them who need public libraries. And so we try to make balanced decisions every day on what we provide for people and how we present our offerings. Let me just say that. Does that answer your question? Oh, you're muted again.
Did you do much difference in purchasing, just like between Boone County and in Cole County?
So a little bit difference in purchasing, yes. And even here in Daniel Boone Regional Library, we purchase for all 4 branches. So Holt, Summit, Fulton, Ashland, and Columbia, and our collection floats. And sometimes we purchase with Columbia is obviously the largest population. So we purchase extra copies or whatever of something that may not be of interest to a branch. The material will float down there, and if no one checks it out, it just kind of floats back. And every once in a while, we'll get a comment from a branch is like, why are all these children's books with different family configurations coming here? That sorts itself out. Yeah. But in Cole County, and it's been a while since I worked at the public library there, but I'm close with the director there. They still have the same approach that there needs to be something for everyone. Our budget is at least twice as big as the Jefferson City-based library system is. So part of it is just about spending the money we have wisely. Okay, Steve?
Yeah, I just wanted to say thank you for coming and doing this. I find the remarks really interesting, and I've really enjoyed hearing the different comments that people have made. So you're doing this presentation, you're working on the letter to the Missourian. Just wondered, what are some specific things that you would recommend that we could do to support you in your efforts to push back against some of this? And if you're going to get to that later, I don't mean to be a challenge to your agenda, but that's what's going through the back of my mind on this.
That's a good question. And I've actually kind of covered, I just wanted to give you an overview. And this is the part that I was looking forward to, is the conversation. Okay. So it's interesting, we put out a sort of a muted call to action for our patrons to make a comment on the proposed rule. Comment period goes through the end of December 15th, next week. And we know that we have patrons commenting on both sides, in favor of and opposed to. And we haven't really tried to provide a narrative for patron comment. I honestly think, and other people think, that this rule probably, it may go to the Joint Committee on Administrative Rules, but we don't really think that it's going to be approved as written. But we are really more preparing for legislation to be filed in this session. And so hearing from patrons of the library, I think, is more important to legislators than hearing from the library director or even the library trustees. Our trustees are appointed by our elected officials, and they represent the community. They're not trained librarians. They're here to help make sure that we're working within, sort of whatever community priorities are. But who these rules and laws really affect are end users. And so that's where we, if needed, may put out a call to action in the future about contacting your local legislator. Depending on where you live in Columbia, your conversation will be different from someone who lives across town based on who our legislators are at the moment. But being able to articulate your faith in the professional librarians who work for your library district and your belief that the library provides a valuable public service is important. And that's who needs to hear from you all, I think. It's been nice to talk to, I've had a couple of other conversations with a couple of other groups and gotten a lot of support and some great questions. And so we know that in Columbia, you know, most people really value our library and enjoy what we offer, but not everybody understands it. We have probably half of our entire population has library cards, which is really a good, and that's a high number. People who try to say that libraries are no longer relevant aren't coming to the library and seeing what we do. I see Sue's hand up again.
What? No.
It's Herb's hand.
Oh, sorry, Herb. Well, there should be, okay.
We have bipolar situation between the two of us here. One of the things which we deal with is that the state legislature, which is associated with many of these issues, is not an especially learned bunch. And one former legislator from Columbia came back from her first meeting there and declared to friends that she found, he was convinced that 1/2 of the members of the House were functionally illiterate. Now, this is perhaps, it is the case that I think in my context that very few of the members of the legislature have a clue what really goes on with public libraries. And there's a decent enough system in Cole County, and there is one, a very good one here, I think, and I compliment you. I wonder if the Association of Public Librarians could not try to figure out a way to make it interesting for a number of members of the legislature at some point in the course of a year to be escorted or for an hour or more, 2 hours around these facilities to see who's there, what they're doing, and what you're all about. That's a long-term project because you'd have to plan it with others, but it's just a seed thought.
Well, it's a great thought. And I will tell you that many libraries, it's just interesting, many libraries around the state have good relationships with their legislators on both sides of the aisles. A longstanding program in many libraries is to invite those legislators in to give a story time. And definitely the new folks tours. We don't have guest story time readers here for whatever reason. Our youth services person doesn't do that, but we do here reach out and try to get those same legislators into our building by hosting town hall meetings. And we provide, if they ask us, like Cherie Tolson-Reich wants to do a drop-in, come in and see if you've got unclaimed property at the state and I'll help you do that. We absolutely love being able to do those kinds of things. We work really hard to keep our personal thoughts to ourselves when we are in Jefferson City in February, the first Tuesday in February every year. The library community goes down and we have an advocacy day and we talk about our issues. It gets harder and harder though as the polarization of the political system grows. And I agree with you about the the education level and the literacy level of many people in the legislature. And this is just my personal opinion, I blame term limits on that, but we're electing people who are not working in the best interest of all of their constituency. It just seems to be sort of a ladder people are trying to climb, and that's hard. We do have we have some local representatives and past reps who are big users of our library, bring their kids in, really appreciate what we're doing. We're not really hearing much of anything for them because they get it. But we have others who don't,
I just do a real quick comment. I worked down in Jeff City for over 30 years, and I was always in walking distance of the library there. So I actually, for a number of years, used it more, especially for my book club, because I could find the book there. Whereas here,
People
there
were
were
reading
two,
it.
yeah, it was already checked out. And I also in the course of just browsing, I came across some books that I probably never would have found. There are two that come to mind that changed my life, and I've referenced a number of times.
So appreciate that you and others in the state are sensitive to the need and are doing things. Keep it up, and the more you can do, I think, the better for the state.
Yes.
appreciate that. Mr. Robinson has his hand up.
Well, I tell you, this thing looks like a lawsuit to me. So is there anything you'd like to tell us about, not that in particular, but about organizations that people might want to support who help people with such lawsuits?
Sure. The ACLU, for one. You may have seen the news that they have filed suit against the Kansas City School District. They've actually been working since, I think, early fall with the Missouri Association of School Librarians, and also in conjunction with the Missouri Library Association to to find a plaintiff. And they have committed to helping us moving forward. They can't file against a proposed rule, and I don't even think they can
That's right.
do against an actual rule in place, but the legislation can be whatever, you know what I'm saying. So the ACLU is working very hard with us. The American Library Association is working behind the scenes as well. They're pretty well positioned. I mean, if you're so moved, they have a way to donate. There's an organization called Every Library. It's a 501c4. No, it's not. It's an advocacy organization that works. It's the effort largely of one person, but they have a board, and they're also working on messaging. So there's actually a lot going on behind the scenes that people may not be aware of. But I would say the ACLU is going to be our biggest help, because, like I said, we do expect legislation to be filed, and it's anybody's guess as to what's going to actually make it through this next session.
In education, we often get help from an outfit called FIRE, and I forget what it stands for, but it's something like free something. It's about free speech as well. And this may not fall under their bailiwick, but your suggestions are very good.
And that made me think too. I'm looking that up real quick, and I'm not coming up with anything but French fries here. PEN America, which is an authors guild. I don't think that's like an organization, but authors are coming out in opposition to this. And, people are saying it's hyperbole for us to call this movement censorship, but it literally is the government saying what can and cannot be available to read. And that's censorship, plain and simple. So thanks. I'm going to pop to Alice Turner and come back to the Scalas. Alice?
Yeah, I was just unmuting. Sort of a related point. We know our schools are under attack. They were vastly under attack during COVID. We need at least one more person to run for school board here. One incumbent who's good is running. Paul, who worked with, was a legal person with Nicole Galloway, is running. I met him last night, but we need at least one more person. So I'm reaching out to the people on this call to think about it, as well as reach out to others. I don't know the filing deadline, but the sooner the better. What? Anyway, I just wanted to mention that. Thank you.
Sure, thanks. Carl or Mari?
Filing deadline is December the 27th at 5 o'clock. And Lyra is meeting with people who are interested tomorrow at the office.
Okay, thank you.
Yeah, thank you. I'm glad Herb mentioned associations and David also mentioned help and so on. Often on a national level, some of these groups are very useful to particular constituencies. I'm sure that's true with you, with libraries and librarians. And I'm sure that also that many states are sharing some of the same issues that you are, and some of their approaches may be successful, some maybe not so much. But can you describe a little bit about how is there collaboration between a lot of do a lot of folks in various states feel now put upon because of some of this pressure and so on and so forth?
Yes, there's a lot going on across the country. The umbrella organization for us is the American Library Association. It has a policy office arm, as well as just the professional development, the main association. And they serve as a clearinghouse and have for many decades of challenged material. So you can go to the ALA.org website and see lists by year of the titles of books that have been challenged. And their public policy arm works very, very hard to supply support, resources to individual libraries or librarians even that reach out to them for help. Now, ALA has not gotten a good reputation among the conservative organizations in our country because they feel that ALA is like pushing an agenda, whatever. But keep in mind, ALA is a membership organization, just as is the American Medical Association, etc. We are aware that there are conservative groups that are writing legislation to be shared. That happened in Missouri about 3 or 4 years ago. It was such a poorly written bill that it was obvious it was written by someone from out of state. And so we know that this is going on across the country. And while there are thousands of libraries in this country, we can't all work together other than under a big organization like ALA. We have networks and we have listservs and we have ways to help each other. But some people are really fighting a hard battle on the home front, and it's all they can do. Especially the library I mentioned that what the director was being stalked was in Kirksville, Missouri. She quit her job. She couldn't do it anymore because there was literally a crazy man following her around, going into his library with cameras, getting in the face of staff, just some really ugliness. So, in the moment, people have to rely on themselves to handle those situations. And it is just hard. There's more going on than the general public probably sees. I mean, we get ugly comments. I can deal with those, but I don't know how I would handle it if somebody stormed into a board meeting, literally screaming and calling me a pornographer. And that has happened. So anyway, I think I over answered your question. I really appreciate. Oh, Kathy, there's a hand we haven't heard from.
Yes, I just wanted to say that I plan to write a comment and send it to the Secretary of State opposing this rule, both because there is so much vagueness in it, but also because of the risk of, because it does propose censorship, and it should leave the decision about what children read up to the parents of those children, and not to other parents to make the rule for everybody else in the state or everybody else in a given community. So I just hope others will join with me and also oppose this. I think I would like to be trusting of the legislature and trusting of Secretary Ashcroft, but I can't be because of these kinds of things and the kind of legislation that we've seen. I wish I could count on them having good intentions. Again, I don't feel like I can, and I'm sorry about that, but that is really how I feel the situation is.
Thank you. Pam?
I just wanted to remind everyone that in the announcements, I do have this proposed rule. And so you'll be able to look at it very carefully before you write your statement to the Secretary of State. And I ask that everyone does that. It's really important by December the 15th. And I think it may have been your statement that is in there as well. It's been a couple of weeks before I put it in. So that should be helpful. But what you have said today has really helped me collect my thoughts about what I want specifically to say to him. And I also, as you must, have concerns about that law that was passed and about criminalizing the librarians of the schools. And it's really, I can't imagine, I don't even understand why the governor signed it. Well, I guess I should, but anyway, if there's something that can be done about that as well, I would like to.
Well, the ACLU is working on that. And I will say, you know, what makes it hard is we're talking about children.
Sure.
Most everybody loves children for the right reasons. We want to protect our children, and parents want to nurture their children with their own values. And we can't and don't want to argue against that. That's what makes it so hard when one side is claiming we're providing pornography and prurient materials to little kids. It's a difficult argument, and we have to be strong. And so every voice helps make that statement. As I understand it, once the rule period is over, the comments will be published. I'm hoping that they all will. And I'm sure there are some that are going to be in support, but it'll be interesting to read, I think. Before I move on to the next hand raised, I'm just going to put my email in the chat. You are free to email me or call me. My direct number is also I'm going to post that. If you want to bounce an idea or thought off of me or have a question about how our library manages things, I'm happy to be here for you in that way. Okay, and so yeah, I think the Scala's collective hand is back up.
Thank you. I just wanted to point out that Sarah Catlin wrote a very eloquent post about the role of the library in her life, and I know many of us have similar stories, so I wanted to be sure you saw that.
Yes, I have to read it more fully because it scrolled by. Thank you, Sarah. Dilemmas, which one is speaking?
At the risk of being repetitive, is it not appropriate for libraries, especially public libraries, to declare that they do have an agenda? And the agenda is the promotion of knowledge and understanding in the public as a whole. And everything follows from that we take care to avoid side effects and so this sort of thing, but never to lose sight of that the object is the promotion of knowledge and understanding, not the promotion of ignorance.
I think my answer to that is absolutely yes. And I have run that narrative through I see you win now. Sorry, I'll get you in just a second. I have run that narrative and that script through my head many times. My only concern is parroting the term agenda, because that is a kind of a push button word for people. But absolutely, that is our agenda. That's what we do. And it's a valid thing. So I understand Wynn has been trying to speak for a while. You were not showing up on my screen. I'm so sorry. Go ahead.
Thank you. I wanted to make people aware that the League of Women Voters statewide has had a position of support for state libraries, for the public library system for many years. And a few weeks ago, the state board set out a call to members to respond to this onerous proposal rule. The League supports the public primary system as a basic community service with a long-term assured, stable, and adequate funding source. It also supports access by all persons to public library services as a major source of knowledge and information necessary for informed, active participation in a democratic society. Those are the positions in brief, and then there's a lot more in depth about it. But that is, this is another group that is active and supportive of your stance. And I personally agree with all those who've been speaking in support of our Daniel Boone library system. I think it's fabulous and serves everyone from practically birth onward in its variety of programs. And we all do need to respond to this threat. So thank you.
No, thank you. We love our collaboration here locally in Columbia with the League of Women Voters. And I was raised by a leaguer myself, so what you do is great work. I feel very privileged to be the director here at Daniel Boone because the community is so supportive, and it's nice to talk to people and hear stories like that Sarah just shared in the chat about how we change lives here in a positive way. So that is all good. I see that Dave has put the email address of the comment, the place to comment to the secretary. You need to put in the subject line, and I've been trying to find a place I can cut and paste it. You need to put the citation to the comment in the subject line to make sure that it goes to the right place. So I will try to do that as we finish up here.
It's also in the announcements, Margaret. So
okay. So you guys,
it will be emailed to everyone after our meeting.
Okay, you got
and it will be posted on our website as well.
Okay. Well, I can't believe it's 12:58 by my count, but I want to thank you all so much for this great conversation and your thoughts and your support. Does anyone have any final question?
We'll be looking for your op-ed in the Missourian against what Steve Spellman wrote, which was, well,
he doesn't have a full understanding about libraries.
No, he does not.
He was very much writing from a place of privilege, which those of us who kind of are aware of those kinds of things.
He made a statement that people don't use libraries that much anymore because books are so cheap and they could just go buy them. And I was astounded by that statement.
Well, he's a banker. Maybe that's easy for him to do, but yeah, no,
Steve's misunderstanding is not just related to libraries, by the way.
Margaret, thank you so much for helping to serve the community.
I'm really glad that you were able to come and speak to us.
Well, I'm happy to do it. Thank you all so much.
Thank you for being here. Appreciate your time.
Sure.
And thanks for